last but not least, I'm very excited to turn the mic over and introduce David Friedman, who is our guest speaker today. David is an award-winning CEO, entrepreneur, author, and renowned public speaker. In 2011, he published his first book, Fundamentally Different, which is based on the insights he learned and taught throughout his leadership career. In 2021, he published the second edition of his book, Culture by Design, the definitive how-to guide to building a high-performance culture, even in the era of remote and hybrid work. His current company, High Performing Culture, has helped hundreds of companies to implement his culture operating system, CultureWise, which you can see behind him when I spotlight his screen. But a real life, truly unsolicited testimonial is that our CEO and visionary Jennifer heard David speak at a Vistage event and was so inspired and fired up by what he had to share that she came back, wrote our authentic actions, which I know I don't need to be stealing your thunder, David, but it has been a game changer for us in taking our values and like drilling in even deeper and making them more real and actionable for our team and our employees. So just a little plug for you, David, that we're using your stuff and it is so I will stop sharing my screen and I'll turn the mic over to you, David.
Excellent. Thank you, Jessica. All right, it is great to get a chance to meet all of you. And as Jessica said, I am David Friedman from CultureWise. And what I work with companies on and help educate people on is how to take your culture and make it more systematic, to be more perhaps process oriented around your culture. All of you are EOS practitioners and integrators. And so you already have this concept of looking at your business in a more systematic, structured kind of way. And yet, while we all know that's important, my experience is that very few organizations take that same disciplined, structured, rigorous approach to how they build their culture. And how do we make our culture not just a nice little thing, but a strategic advantage that is scalable as we grow our company? How do we make sure that our culture can scale with it? And there's a methodology that I teach about that. In the time we have together, I want to share with you just two critical tips as pieces of that methodology so that you can take away something from today and say, hey, you know what? That's something useful. I can do something with that. So the first thing I want to share is that when we think about culture and how important culture is, the most important step in my experience working with hundreds and hundreds of companies, the most important step in really being able to operationalize our culture in a more powerful way is how we get enough clarity about, well, what is our culture supposed to be in the first place? Now, that sounds like a simple thing. Of course, how could I purposely create, build, and embed the culture I want if I don't have enough clarity about what it is? And yet, having said that, my experience is that very few companies do this in as effective a way as they can. And I want to introduce you to maybe a little paradigm shift in how to think about defining your culture. So the traditional way that most companies define their culture, and I know most as integrators have done this, is to write the very typical vision and mission and set of core values. And yet I want to introduce a thought to you that I think is really impactful. And it's a language distinction, but it's a really important language distinction. And it's a distinction between what I call values and what I call behaviors, because I think these are two different things. And I think the difference is more than just semantics. So let me explain the difference to you and why this is such an important issue. So a value to me is typically an abstract concept. Examples of values behind me are things like integrity, quality, respect, innovation, teamwork, service, passion, commitment. These are ideas, they're concepts. A behavior, in contrast, is an action. It's something that I can literally see people doing. So some of the behaviors that I teach in my company are things like you see behind me. Honor commitments. That's something you actually do. Practice blameless problem solving. Be a fanatic about response time. Get clear on expectations. These are actions, these are things that people do. Now the reason, and so to simplify that, sometimes an easy way that I think of it is I think of a value as almost like a noun and a behavior as a verb, a thing versus an action. Now, why is that important? Why does that really matter? Well, here's why this is important and not just simply a question of semantics. The problem in my experience with many companies, not all, but many companies, traditional looking set of core values is that they sound great and that we believe them, they're important to us, and yet they tend to be so broad and abstract that they mean too many different things to different people, and they therefore become very difficult to operationalize. So let me give you a really simple example. One of the values that I see in many organizations, maybe some of you have this in your company, is I'll see companies that have the value for respect. We should all respect each other. It sounds like a perfectly good thing. Who would disagree with that? And yet, what does that word mean? It means a lot of different things to different people. If you grew up in an inner city gang, your definition of what it looks like to respect somebody or maybe to diss them could be completely different than what it means in your family. Or I think about regional differences. Some of you that are on this call that are in the deep South probably were raised as children and taught that when you speak to an adult, you call them sir or ma'am. It's disrespectful not to do that. Do that in the Northeast where I live. I'm in the Philadelphia area. I will tell you, if you do that in the Philadelphia area, it's just freaking weird. It has nothing to do with respect, just different norms. So simply saying, well, one of our core values is respect sounds great, and we believe it, but it's not all that useful. It is very difficult, in my experience at least, and perhaps in yours, to coach somebody about their values. But I could coach them all day long about what I see them doing or maybe not doing, which are really behaviors. So it turns out that if we can define our culture in terms of a set of behaviors, it's a lot easier to operationalize, to coach, to teach, to give people feedback about. And that's ultimately what we're trying to do. You know, the goal isn't just simply to have something on our website that we believe in, but it's to see actions in our people. And so defining our cultures in terms of a set of behaviors tends to be really, really effective. I give those behaviors a name. It's just my own nomenclature for it. I call them fundamentals because I think they're fundamental to success. So just like in sports, music, dance, other things, we have fundamentals. Well, we have fundamentals for how we run our company. Now, how do we marry this simple idea with the traditional EOS approach that you've taken to defining a set of core values? Well, there are two different ways that you can do that and be really effective. So one method, and some of you I'll bet have done something like this, is you could take the core values that you've all defined for your companies, and you could take each one of those values and sort of unpack it into, well, what are the behaviors that help us to live to that? So for example, we could have a value that says innovation. And then we could say, well, what does that look like? What would people be doing that I would say that particular team member is living the value of innovation? Well, I might see this behavior in this one and this one and this one. So we could take our core values, take each of them and unpack them into a set of behaviors that helps more clearly describe how would I bring that value to action? Very logical approach. But there's another approach I want to introduce you to. Again, a little paradigm shift here, which is what I do and most of our clients do. And that is, we could, in a sense, unhook the values and behaviors. What I mean by that is we could take our values and just for a moment, temporary moment, set them on the side. And then what we do is we ask ourselves, without being limited by that, well, what are the behaviors that are really important around here? Without needing to tie them into the values. Now, the reason this is a significant, a simple but significant shift is that if we start with those core values, actually, I'll give you an illustration of this. If we start with those core values and then we define the behaviors that live to them, we're actually introducing a limiter or a constraint to our thinking because the only behaviors we would ever think of are the ones that tie directly to those values. So in the illustration behind me, if our values happen to be, just as an illustration, integrity, quality, excellence, and service, and we identified all the behaviors that helped us to live to that, that's great. But there might be behaviors that are outside of those. Maybe there are some behaviors that are really important to your company's success that don't necessarily fit in integrity or quality or excellence and service, and we would never think of them. We would never, it's not like we'd eliminate them. We wouldn't even come up with them because right from the beginning, we said, nope, the only things we're allowed to talk about here are integrity, quality, excellence, and service. So when we start with those core values, we're introducing a limiter or a constraint to our thinking. So what's the alternative? The alternative is we could just start with our behaviors, again, unhook these. We have our core values. We figure out the behaviors that really drive success in our organization. And then when we introduce them to the organization, we can just say to our organization, well, you know, those 4 or 5 core values, and let's use this example, integrity, quality, excellence, and service, those are really important in our company. But what do those values mean on a day-to-day basis? Well, this list of behaviors is how we live to the list of values. In other words, instead of saying these 3 tie to integrity and these 3 tie to quality, we just say as a group, the way we live to the set of values is by practicing this set of behaviors. And that allows us to not limit ourselves in our behaviors and really figure out the behaviors that are important, but it allows us to introduce this to our organizations as a deepening of the historical work that we've done on our values, as an extension of that, as opposed to it feeling like an abandonment of everything we've always talked about. So I would suggest, just as an alternative, you consider, could we get a lot more clarity about our culture, that if we could define, well, what are the behaviors that we would say, if we could get all of our people to do these things consistently, boy, our company is going to be taken to another level. And doing that gives a lot more crispness, a lot more clarity to what we want our culture to be. Now, once we have that clarity and we really defined what we want, I want to introduce you to one other really simple but really powerful thought. And that is that the idea of creating rituals around these behaviors. So it's great to have a list of behaviors. Wonderful, got it, makes sense. But unless I can operationalize this, who cares? I mean, that's the whole point, is for people to live this stuff. And we do that through this very simple concept that I call creating rituals. So a ritual is some routine that you do over and over and over again. You have a level 10 meeting. It happens all the time. You have weekly other meetings. You get up in the morning, you brush your teeth. When we were kids in school, we used to say the Pledge of Allegiance. They're just routines, habits. Anybody who's read James Clear's Atomic Habits, that's such a great book. If anybody hasn't read it, you all should. It's a fabulous book. And he talks about the way we get successful is we build habits for our lives. I use the word ritual, routine, habit somewhat interchangeably. So the reason that rituals and habits are so important is that most of us are not very good at sticking with things. We come up with all kinds of wonderful ideas, and then we get busy and life gets in the way. It's why you guys are integrators and not visionaries, because you stick with things and you make it happen. Well, when something becomes a ritual, it's not hard to do. It's just what we do. You don't struggle to remember to brush your teeth in the morning. It's just part of your routine. So the way we can use that simple concept is we could take these behaviors, again, I call them fundamentals, it's just my name for it. We could take these behaviors, we roll them into our organization, and then we begin to focus on one each week through a series of rituals. So in other words, if we take week number 1, again, I call them fundamentals, and our fundamental of the week is number 1, and we do a series of things, and I'll give you an example in a moment, but we focus all week long on fundamental number 1, and the following week, we focus all week long on fundamental number 2, and the week after that, number 3, and we cycle through them over and over and over and over again. Eventually, these behaviors just become internalized in our people. So let me give you a really simple example to help you maybe put some teeth behind what I'm suggesting. In our company and pretty much all of our clients, every time we have a meeting in our company, whether it's a project team meeting, a department meeting, a Zoom meeting, the first agenda item of every meeting that happens in my company this week is the fundamental of the week. And we spend the first 3 to 5 minutes talking about it, much like a segue in your level 10 meetings. So we start the meeting, and my fundamental in my company, just to give you an illustration, this week is called Speak Straight. It's about having honest, direct, clear conversations with each other in a way that's really productive. Every meeting, everywhere in my company this week, first thing we do, every meeting, is we spend 3 to 5 minutes talking about speaking straight. What does that mean? What makes that so difficult? How could we be better at it? What gets in the way of it? 3 to 5 minutes. We don't want to take over the meeting. Then we move on, go on to other things. But every single meeting all week long, everywhere in the company, not just leadership, but everywhere in the company, every meeting starts with speaking straight. Next week, every meeting starts with next week's fundamental, and so on. So we do a number of rituals like that to give us lots of chances all throughout the week to think about, focus on, work on, practice, tune up our awareness of this week's fundamental. And if we do that this week with number 1, and next week with number 2, and the next week with number 3, and so on, and we do that over and over and over and over and over and over again, these behaviors just start to become internalized. They become the way we operate in our company. And so that's what Jessica was describing, that they are now doing it authentic. They've got a list of behaviors, and they take one every week, and they focus on it all throughout the week, and it makes those come alive. There's a visual aid, but it makes them come alive. It becomes real for us instead of just being some nice things that look good on the website. So the simple concept I want you to consider here is, if you could define with more clarity what you want your culture to be by describing the behaviors that help you live to that culture, it's going to be more effective. It's going to be easier to teach and coach and guide than simply only having this broad set of core values. And then if we could take those behaviors and we could take one each week and build rituals around focusing on it and do that over and over and over and over and over again, those behaviors are going to start to become internalized. And we now start to build a more scalable system so that our culture can grow with us as our company grows. So quick thoughts on how to do that. I'll just take 1 or 2 minutes, and if people have questions about that, I'd be happy to answer them. And then I know you want to go into your breakout groups, Jessica, so I'll be respectful of your time there. But we probably have 1 or 2 minutes that we could take a question to about what I've shared.
Yeah, please go for it. And I'll leave you spotlighted, but please either speak up or raise your little virtual hand, or just go for it if you have a question you'd like to ask David.
Sorry, Jessica, I couldn't find the hand, so I'm just going to talk. I was looking for
Yeah,
it.
go for it.
So, David, you mentioned WOM. You mentioned you'll roll this out into your meetings. How do you, like, what's the opening question that you have with it? Or is it just wide open and talking about fundamental?
Yeah, good question, Scott. There are specific questions that are very specific to behaviors that you can ask, or there are generic questions that you could ask about any behaviors. So for example, here's some generic questions. You could ask about any, again, I call them fundamentals. So when we were putting together our list of fundamentals, why do you think this one was important enough to make the list? You could ask that about any question. Who in our company do you think is the best one at practicing this? What do you think the impact would be in our company if we were just a little bit better at doing this? What would be the impact if we weren't so good? What's one thing you can do this week to up your game on how well you practice this fundamental? So you could ask questions like those and just pick on one person and ask a question like that, and you get a conversation going. So that's what it looks like.
Perfect. Thanks, David.
Yeah, you bet.
David, this is Meg from Authentic. Oh my gosh, this has been a game changer. Jen was so excited to come back and do this. And we do it a little bit differently. We have actually everyone on our team, we have a schedule. And each Monday, one of our employees puts on Slack a video of, we call them values in action. And then provides some different examples. But then each of our meetings that we go into, it's been a game changer. We start with it, and then we go around the room and acknowledge like different examples and different things. So we don't, it's interesting though. I love how you talked about like maybe even making it into a question. That's something we haven't done, but I love that.
Yeah, generally speaking, the best way to get people engaged is to ask a question. There are a lot of different things you can do. And I'll give people one other tip. The best way to engage people is to ask a specific question of a specific person. In other words, if you say to the group, so this week we're on honoring commitments. Does anybody have anything you want to say? Crickets. Nobody says a thing. If you call on a specific person, you say, Scott, so let me ask you a question. What do you do when somebody makes a commitment on your behalf and they didn't check with you first? Then Scott says, oh, that drives me crazy. And he jumps in, and then Chris jumps in with her answer, and Jessica jumps in with her answer. And all of a sudden we got a good conversation going. So ask a specific person a specific question, and you get a good conversation started.
I love that. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Well, thank you